This is All of It on WNYC. I'm Allison Stewart. Coming up on the show tomorrow, comedian, actor, and now author Roy Wood Jr. will be here to talk about his new book, The Man of Many Fathers, Life Lessons Disguised as a Memoir. We'll mark the 25th anniversary of Alicia Keys' debut album, Songs in A Minor, and poet Allen Ginsberg would have turned 100 this month. We'll commemorate his birthday with writer Iris Silverberg, plus call in and share your favorite Ginsberg work. That's on Friday's show. Now let's get this hour started with a novel set in 19th century Ireland. Author Maggie O'Farrell is coming off a big year. She received an Oscar nomination for her screenplay adapting her own novel Hamnet into a film. Actor Jessie Buckley won Best Actress for playing Agnes, the character Maggie created. And now her new novel Land is a New York Times bestseller. Author Ann Patchett told us on this show that it's even better than Hamnet. Land begins with a mysterious event. In the mid-19th century in Ireland, Thomas and his young son Liam are hard at work creating updated maps of the country for the British. They encounter a mysterious deep well of spring water. Liam is frightened and leaves it alone, but Thomas drinks from the water and is profoundly changed. Suddenly, the previously quiet man won't stop talking. He is convinced that his job is evil and doesn't want to do it anymore. He's determined to move his family, his pregnant wife, his son Liam, and his daughters from Dublin to the land right by the potentially magical spring. It's a choice that will change the course of the family's lives forever. Land is Maggie O'Farrell's 10th novel. Kirkus calls the book steeped in Irish history and folklore, alive with a sense of wonder. It's out now, and Maggie O'Farrell joins me in studio. It is nice to speak to you in person.
It's very nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
This is your 10th novel. What was something that you wanted to achieve with this novel that you really hadn't tried before?
Oh, lots of things, really. I think it's really important with every book that you write, you set yourself a new hurdle to try and clear. But with this book, I wanted to do two things. I wanted to tell the story of a family who are trying to come out from under the long shadow of An Gcomór, the Great Hunger, or the Great Famine, as it's sometimes known in Ireland. But I also wanted to try and tell the whole history of Ireland just via one peninsula and all the people who've ever lived on it.
The Great Hunger, as you mentioned, is important to this story. Will you explain to people what it was?
Yes, so in the middle of 19th century in Ireland, the crop of the potatoes was affected by a blight. Mm-hmm. So all those crops were destroyed, and most of the working people of Ireland relied on potatoes as their sole source of nutrition, and absolutely disastrous for those families, particularly in the west of Ireland, because they had nothing to eat. So in one sense it was a natural disaster, but it was also exacerbated and made a lot worse by Ireland's very complicated history and colonisation by Britain and the British government. And it was an absolute cataclysm. 1 million people died of nutrition or starvation-related disease, and a further 1 million or 2 million were induced to emigrate.
And that plays into your novel, into why Thomas is making these maps.
I was interested in the story. You know, it's the history books about that time in Ireland focus, and rightly so, on the 1 million people who died. And I think the narratives of the people who emigrated, quite a lot, we're now sitting in, those narratives are quite familiar to us. You know, we know that story of emigration. We know the story of starting a new country. But what interested me in writing Land is the people who stayed, the people who survived, and how they picked themselves up, how they came living. And I just wanted to write a novel about that resilience. Resilience seems to me a very particular characteristic of Ireland.
Why do you think that is a characteristic of Ireland?
Possibly because they haven't had a huge amount of choice, unfortunately. Yeah. I think they had to be resilient. It was a terrible, terrible thing that happened. And one of the things that really inspired me to write the book was about 4 or 5 years ago, I read that the population of Ireland has only now reached pre-famine levels. So it's taken 170 years just for the population to recover.
Wow, that's mind-blowing.
Yeah, isn't it? Yeah.
My guest is Maggie O'Farrell. We're discussing her new novel, Land. It's about a 19th century Irish mapmaker, his family, and the magical spring that changes their lives forever. It's out now. I read that this was inspired in part by your ancestors.
Yes, that's right. So I think all families have their myths. And when we were children, we were told that one of our antecedents had, and when I was a child, I heard it as drew the first ever map of Ireland. Obviously, that's not true. But as a child, that was
that worked for you as a kid.
That was the narrative that I kind of metabolized. And so as you can probably tell, I was born in Ireland, but I didn't grow up there. You can tell my voice. I grew up mostly in Britain. But we used to go back to Ireland every summer, and I used to imagine this ancestor of mine. And he was kind of visually, I think, based on sort of Sunday night costume dramas. So he was definitely wearing a frock coat, probably some kind of cravat. But also he was holding my school issue 30-centimetre ruler, which obviously to my child mind, that was how you measured a whole country. So he's always been somebody that's really fascinated me. And when I got a bit older, obviously, I realised that all that was total childhood fantasy. So I went to the archives in Dublin. Dublin archives hold the Ordnance Survey map records. And I wanted to try and find him. I wanted to know if this was true, this story. And he was quite hard to find because if you were Irish and you worked for the Ordnance Survey, which was a commission by the British government, run by the British Army, if you were Irish, you weren't allowed to sign your own work. So all his notes, his field notes, his measurements, his sketches, his draft maps, all were signed not by himself but by a British Army officer. But I did find his signature on some kind of memorandum for labourers, as they were called, the Irish, and that was really, it was an amazing kind of archival thrill, the idea that I was touching a piece of paper that he had touched. But also it was incredible because I realised that there was truth in the family myth that he hadn't been working alone, obviously, but he had been working on the second revision to the maps of Ireland.
Do you remember when you had that in your hand? Because you were obviously by yourself. You're like looking around and you want to tell somebody at that moment.
Yeah. Archives are quite quiet, but there are quite a lot of people around, all researching quite abstruse things. So I was able to tell a few people.
That's exciting. The story begins with Tomas and Liam. They're working for the Ordnance Survey, the British organization. What's the purpose of the organization? What's the purpose of them drawing these maps?
Well, the Ordnance Survey is a mapping company, and they were commissioned by the British government originally in 1820, earlier in the century, to make a map of Ireland. It was for taxation purposes. It was for a tax called the cess tax. Even now in Ireland today, there's a kind of expression which is bad cess to you, which basically means something much ruder, which I'm not going to say on air. But even now, in the vocabulary in Ireland, that tax is a terrible curse, even to bring up that name. So originally it was for taxation, and it took them a really long time to make the first map, partly because they decided they weren't going to employ any Irish people. And also Ireland has a very complicated history with land, Lots of people have occupied it, lots of people have broken it up. The plantations originated in Ireland. The sort of plantation system originated there. So it's very complicated. And of course, language is very complicated. The Irish language was banned several times by the British. So place names and who owns what is a very fraught issue. And so my great-great-grandfather was working on the second revision, which came straight after the Great Famine, because obviously those early maps were made obsolete during the disaster of the famine because the human and physical geography of Ireland completely changed during that massive population loss.
What did you learn about the study of cartography in creating this book that you didn't know before? Well,
I just didn't really know anything about cartography before I wrote this book. But I became really, really absorbed in the idea of it. I think beforehand, I just thought cartography was about measuring and it was about drawing, and that's what a map was. But now, having finished the book and been thinking about mapping for a really long time, it seems to me this really complicated and beautiful discipline which brings together mathematics, algebra, artistry, history, folklore, linguistics. It's incredibly complicated. And the people who worked on it had to be, they were men at the time, they had to be Renaissance men. They had to be able to do all those things.
My guest is author Maggie O'Farrell. We're discussing her new novel, Land. It's about a 19th century Irish mapmaker, his family, and the magical spring that changes their lives forever. Would you mind reading a little bit from the book? You can set this up for us.
Certainly. So this is from right at the beginning of the book, where a father and son mapping team, as you say, have been working on surveying a peninsula out in the west of Ireland. The father loves the work. The boy Liam does not. Liam trudges the distance towards the cluster of trees tucked into a hollow between two hills. He glances back to find out if his father is watching him, but sees only a gaunt outline etched against the shifting liquid sky. In an unaccustomed act of rebellion, Liam tosses a surveying pole to the ground. He's sick of carrying it, sick to his back teeth. He moves towards the copse, talking in his mind to his sister, Enda, who is not quite a year older than him. Sick to my back teeth, he tells her. You should see the way he orders me about, like I'm a donkey or a dog, and you wouldn't believe the weather he has me out in. Enda has been acutely disappointed that she hadn't been taken on this mapping expedition, but their father has said it was no work for a girl. Liam will tell her, when they get back, that she was the lucky one, getting to stay at home. He is exploring his own emerging back teeth as he steps towards the first green trees, feeling the hard, pearly nubs erupting from his tender pink gums. Then he pauses. Later that night he will wonder why. Was it that he stopped, or did something stop him? Which way round was it? The quality of light in the copse is immediately different, verdant and lustrous, glimmering with the trembling of the leaf canopy. The wind vanishes, as does the relentless rain. He is enclosed and enfolded, as if he has stepped inside the secret green house of a giant. Liam looks up. The tops of the trees separate and collide in the breeze, revealing and concealing the opaline sky. He sees the arrowhead leaves of an aspen entangling with the ripple-edged foliage of an oak, bending together like conspirators. Underfoot the ground is spongy with damp. It oozes from the soil, the leaf rot. It sucks and grips at his boot soles. He glances down and sees that there is a thick, luxuriant moss, glistening and emerald bright, blanketing everything. The humps of stone, the long cylinders of fallen branches, the ridged splay of roots, unidentifiable mounds that suggest loaves of bread, or animal lairs, or tiny graves. Liam's mind reels, flailing desperately away from the thought. Not graves, no, not here. For who would bury a child or many children here, in this desolate and soggy woodland? He knows, of course, about the terrible times in this country when the great hunger struck, which happened not much more than his short lifetime ago. Knows about the countless starved people buried in ditches all over the land, and the rest driven away in coffin ships. These mounds are too small, much too small, to be human children, and no one, surely, would inter their tiny, starved younglings in this lonely place. Would they?
That is Maggie O'Farrell reading from her novel, Land. Tomas and his wife are both survivors of the Great Hunger. How does the memory of death and extreme hunger affect both of them?
I think for me the novel is a lot about the tension between speech and silence and language and being silenced. The first line of the novel was the first thing that ever came to me. I was on a train to Dublin and I'd been thinking about this novel and circling around it for a really long time, and then the first line came into my head, and it was, his father was ever a man of few words. And I just realised that I think I just pictured him and his wife, actually, as people who hold these terrible things inside them, the terrible things they've been through, the terrible things they've witnessed, but they never let them out. They are completely silenced by them. They smother them with silence. But of course, silence doesn't mean that it's not there, and that all four children are aware of these gaps in their parents' story, and they're aware of that very, very articulate silence, and it affects them, all four of them, in very different ways.
It's interesting because a lot of reviews describe Tomas as taciturn. Do you think that is who he is, or is that part of his character, or is he behaving that way?
I think in a sense it's his coping mechanism is probably what we call it now. Yeah. It wouldn't have been called that then. But I think that's the way he's had to pick himself up. He's had to carry on. He has had to form a life. You know, he's married. He's had children. He's found a job. He's coping really well. He's very, very resilient. But at the same time, yes, there is this terrible dark cloud within him. And his only way to carry on is just to keep it silent.
We'll have more discussing the book Land with Maggie O'Farrell after a quick break. We'll talk about the spring next. You're listening to All of It on WNYC. I'm Allison Stewart. My guest in studio is Maggie O'Farrell. We're discussing her new novel, Land. It's about a 19th century Irish mapmaker, his family, and the magical spring that changes their lives forever. Would you describe this spring to us?
Yes, it is a sacred well. And You find these all over Ireland. I mean, every town, every village will have one either in it or near it. And some of them are really well preserved and very much part of current communities. They're often by the sides of roads or in fields. Some of them are inside churchyards. And some of them are completely neglected and overgrown. And I went on a tour about 3 or 4 years ago with my son, who's always up for a weird quest. And we went looking for, and it was specifically the ones that were forgotten about that interested me. He did say to me on the first night we'd arrived and I was unpacking my suitcase, he said, "Why have you brought secateurs on this trip?" And I said, "Because we're going to have to cut a lot of brambles, a lot of nettles to find these wells." But they have always fascinated me ever since I was a really young child, because they go right back to pagan, pre-Christian Ireland, when, you know, there were people believed in hydromancy, there were druids, when, you know, it was worshipping the land, and what you could see and what you could touch was very much their religion, in a sense. And these are a link to the island then. And now, of course, mostly they're part of Catholicism and Christianity, and they have saints' names, and people will do very complicated devotions. They will walk around them 7 times, they'll say a decade, and they will ask for a cure, and sometimes drink from the well, sometimes leave a piece of cloth or an offering to the well in the hope of getting some kind of cure or wish or prayer answered.
That reminds me, it's in New Mexico. It's St. Chimayo. There's that in the United States as well.
Yeah.
Liam, he approaches this body of water, but he gets really scared. He screams for help. What is it about the spring and the area that it's in that is frightening to him?
Well, to Liam, he senses that there's something at work which he doesn't understand, and it's something powerful. And I really wanted to make a link with this novel to Irish mythology. And in those in those mythological cycles and those stories, which I had read to me as a child, but my dad would only ever read them to us. He wouldn't read us anything else. So all those kind of battles and giants and abductions and love affairs and wars are really sort of part of my storytelling bedrock. And I wanted that sense. Also, in those stories, the natural world is the supreme power. You know, humans come a very low second, really. And, you know, you have to really respect the natural world in Irish myth. And if you're ever told in an Irish myth not to cross a river or don't cut a branch from that tree, you really mustn't, because something really bad will happen to you. And I wanted to kind of sort of infiltrate as much of that atmosphere of animism, I suppose, and the powerful element of nature into this novel. So Liam feels that when he steps into this copse, because it's a scrap of ancient woodland that's never been cut, and it dates back to very, very sort of pre-human habitation in Ireland, and he does not like it at all.
It's interesting. How do you balance the history, which is very important to get that right, with the mythology as a writer?
I mean, in a sense, I find the two really, really deeply intertwined. You know, you take Irish myth, for example, and Irish myth is really populated with a lot of giants. And then you think, well, actually, the Vikings had quite a strong influence in Ireland. You know, they raided it. They also came and they settled and they built Dublin, they intermarried. And, you know, you think, are those giants actually just Norsemen? Are they Vikings? So there's always a kind of historical, factual application of myth. And going back to the Holy Wells, somebody recently did an analysis of some of the water of these wells, and some of them have really strong reputations for curing particular things. There's one in County Cork that's been said for millennia to cure madness. And when they examined the water, it was found it had really high levels of lithium, which even now is used for treatment of mental illness. So I love that fact, because you think, you know, those druids, they were onto something.
Thomas goes to the spring. He kind of has a revelation that changes him. He won't stop talking. He won't sleep. He has ideas and plans. How does his transformation, what's different about him? What's different about him as a person?
Well, after he has drunk from the well, which I think before he drank from that, he would not have believed in any kind of mystical powers that the well has. After that, yes, as you say, he cannot stop talking. He's also happy. He's really delighted to see his son, and his son is very taken aback because his father's being affectionate with him. He wants to talk, and he also, Tomas says that he's going to give up working for the Redcoats, as he called them, the British, the Ordnance Survey, and he does not want to make their maps anymore. He wants to make his own. He wants to make a map of ancient Ireland and all those sacred sites that still exist in Ireland today. So he's said, I'm not going to do the British colonialist map. I'm going to do my own map.
We're going to let everybody just have to wait and read the book to find out the end. So we'll stop there. But I did want to talk about your writing about the land. What role does nature play in your writing? Because it's a key part of Hamnet as well. It's a key part of this novel. There are pages, beautiful pages written about the natural world.
Yes, I think, land, I always knew the book was going to be called Land, and land is a very potent concept in Ireland. Who owns it, who's taken it away, what it means to people in Ireland. It's a very, very strong concept and a very fraught concept as well, historically. And, I also wanted to write a kind of contrast, in a sense, between the vast timescale of a landscape versus the almost butterfly lives of the humans who live upon it.
There's a difference between land and nature, though.
That's true. It goes back to the Irish mythology. I wanted to bring in as much as I could of that atmosphere, and the natural world is so powerful in Irish mythology.
What's your relationship to Ireland? Because, as you said, you're from Ireland, but you grew up in
Britain. Yeah, Scotland, and then Wales. Yeah, it's a complicated thing. I think when most people ask me where I'm from, I think they're expecting a one-word answer, but I always have to give a kind of paragraph. And I think if you don't grow up where you were born, or if your accent, as in my case, doesn't match your passport, I think you always do have a sense of dislocation, or almost a kind of doppelganger or ghost self who walks along beside you, as if, the person who you might have been if you'd stayed. I often wonder if, what our lives would have been like if we hadn't left Ireland, or if we'd stayed. I'd sound completely different for a start.
Did you go? You obviously went back for this book. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
What area stays with you from your research trips to Ireland for this book?
Oh, the peninsula in the book is fictitious. It's based on several places, but it is fictitious. I don't name it. And actually, the word Ireland and Irish doesn't appear in the novel at all, and the word Britain and British doesn't appear. And it's partly because I wanted to ask readers to imagine a sense of maplessness. It's so hard for us now when we all have a little GPS in our pockets at all times. Or we all, when mapping is done by satellite and drone, it's really hard for us to imagine a time when maps did not exist, when we navigated by asking people or by the stars, when we didn't know what was over that next hill unless we climbed that hill to look. So I wanted to ask readers, readers will vaguely know where they are. They know it's on the west coast of Ireland, but they don't really know for sure where they are, because I wanted that sense of slightly disorientation.
The name of the book is Land. I'm speaking with author Maggie O'Farrell. You were kind enough to offer some suggestions for our All of It Summer Reading Challenge. Listeners, there's still time to sign up. Head to wnyc.org/summer reading challenge. Okay, let's run through the categories. First, a book published in 2026. You could read Land. Or what would you suggest?
This was a really hard one because there have been amazing books published this year. But I think I would have to go with Tayari Jones's Kin, which is an absolute, I would read anything Tayari Jones for. If she wants to publish a shopping list, I'm there. But Kin is a really fascinating, beautiful, interrogative novel about the friendship between two young girls and the different paths their lives take due to partly economic circumstances, to do with parental input. But it's just a beautiful evocation of lives and the roads, forks you can take in different roads.
Next, a book about U.S. history or American historical fiction.
I would go for Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry, a friend of mine whose reading taste I really Trust came across a bookshop recently holding this 800-page book about cowboys, and I said, really?
Cowboys?
Are you sure? Anyway, I was totally hooked by about page 50, and it's an incredible book about frontier America and the kind of forming of a country, really, and also about the friendship between two men and the trust between them, which is just really moving.
Next is a book set in or written by an author from one of the 48 World Cup countries. We can only do that this year.
I am going to have to go for Scotland because I live in Scotland, and it's a very beautiful novel called Clear by a writer called Caris Davis, and it's about a reverend minister who lands on an almost uninhabited Hebridean island, and interesting things ensue. It's wonderful.
Next, a classic.
Again, this was a really hard one to narrow down to one, but I think I'd go for The Colour Purple by Alice Walker.
Oh,
it's
a good story.
Just an unbelievably brilliant book, and I have to read it about every 2 or 3 years, and it's epistolary, which a lot of people slightly forget, all told in letters. And again, it's about resilience, really, the incredible resilience of Seeley.
And also the mysticism is there,
yes,
too.
Yes, that's true. It's just stupendous.
Fifth, a work of genre fiction, romance. It could be sci-fi. What do you think? Horror.
Well, people call this book sci-fi. I think it's more horror, but it's Kindred by Octavia Butler. I mean, you have to be... I wouldn't read it if you're on your own in the house. Because
Yes.
It's really frightening, but it's about a woman who time travels back to her ancestors who are enslaved people, and she finds out what it's like to live day to day as being an enslaved person. And it's just unbelievably brilliant and unbelievably upsetting.
And finally, a book about or set in New York City.
Colin McCann's This Side of Brightness, which is a novel, I think, from maybe around 2000, the year 2000, and it's about the men who dug the tunnels for the subway system. Really, really wonderful novel.
That's an excellent suggestion. Thank you so much for doing that. We
My
really
pleasure.
appreciate it. I want to get this in before we wrap up. We haven't spoken to you since the film adaptation of Hamnet. That's a big deal. Now that you've had a little time to reflect, what was the best part of that experience working with Chloe Zhao, watching Jessie Buckley win Best Actress, or some little thing that we didn't see?
Oh, goodness. It was a very, very wild ride. And not something I ever really expected, but it was all really joyous. I felt like I learnt so much. You know, the reason why I said yes to writing a screenplay was because I just turned 50 and I thought, at this point in life, I should be learning new things. I should be trying new things. And I really, working with Chloe was incredible. Certainly, I think watching Jessie win an Oscar was probably the high point for me. So well deserved.
The name of the new novel is Land. It's by my guest, Maggie O'Farrell. Thank you so much for joining us in studio. We really appreciate your time.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.